Welcome, everyone. We're eager to get started with our first informal office hours for chat and the core coffee chat. So we have an assignment for you as you're waiting for the official start, which is to get out a blank piece of paper and a thick marker that could be seen when we hold things up. And we're going to draw a picture of an ideal virtual meeting and then the reality of a virtual meeting. And this is not an art project. It's just more like Pictionary. Anything works. We might ask you to explain your drawing, but just give us a quick snapshot of those two things, and we'll share them in just a moment. So if you're just joining, we're going to have a chance to try to answer some of your questions that you asked us while you were registering, as well as questions that come up during this session. And we're going to focus on some virtual facilitation techniques. We're going to try to practice what we preach as we go along here. And so in just a second, we'll have a chance to do some introductions. But first, I wanted to make sure that we're all oriented to the screen as you're doing your pictures. If you're new to Zoom, there's a little chat bubble, a little voice bubble. On my screen, it's at the bottom of the screen, and you may have to hover your mouse to reveal it, but that's the way that you can communicate with us if you're having any sort of Zoom issues or want to communicate with the whole group. And then you should also have some silhouettes that show the participants. If you click on that, you can see a list of everyone who's on the call. You can also use that to change your name, as Peggy just did. If you hover your mouse over the name on the participants list and click more, you can rename yourself. You might want to show the agency that you're with, for example. You might want to adopt a different persona for the day. It's all good. You can also put in, we're not doing breakout sessions today, but if you were doing breakout sessions in Zoom, one of the things we've done is to ask people to put an asterisk next to their name in the participants list, and that tells us that you are not interested in participating in a breakout group. So you can give people that option, because sometimes that's important. But anyway, there are ways to use that participants list, and we're doing it right now. It shows you who's muted, whose camera is off as well. If people have a picture as part of their profile, it'll show there. Otherwise, it's just initials. It also shows you who's on the phone, not the person on the phone, but the fact that there are people on the phone. If you are listening by phone, you can link your audio to the webcam by pressing the number hashtag key, and then your participant ID, and then hashtag again. And it's the participant ID is in the little information icon, the eye inside of a circle at the top left of your screen. Okay. So are we ready to share some drawings? Nicole, do you want to do the official start?
So, yeah, so I'm going to stop sharing the slide. If you're still drawing or writing, feel free to continue, but I'm going to stop it so we can then see in gallery view. And we'll actually encourage everyone, if you can, if you have a working camera, to turn on your camera so we can first see your lovely faces. And if you, and you're welcome to unmute yourselves at this point. And we might even have a small enough group today that as long as you don't have any loud noise going on in the background for you, we might be able to just keep ourselves unmuted so that we can have a more free-flowing discussion today. But on the, actually, I think we have a small enough group. Let's go around and hold them up one by one and just tell us quickly who you are. And then hold up your picture and hold it up close enough, try to hold it up close enough to the camera and center it so that people can see. And so I'll go first just to model. So I'm Nicole Young. I'm one of the consultants that leads CORE. And so on this side is my picture of an ideal virtual meeting, clear agenda, things getting accomplished, people all happy. and, talking and getting ideas and asking questions, and all of that is, very additive. So it makes it a great meeting. And in reality, in virtual meetings, there's a lot of, hello, hello, can you hear me? Can you see me? This is the, can't figure out how to turn my camera on. People talking, sometimes it's me talking, still on mute. So lots of those kinds of things that just can sometimes make the agenda less straightforward than we hope. Okay, that was probably a little bit longer than what we have time for each person to do, but just a quick example. So how about, I'm gonna call on Peggy, because I see her paper is already kind of in the camera.
It is. My name is Peggy Flynn, and I do consulting around fund development and capacity building. And I am a very, very talented artist. I want you to know that in advance, meaning not. So here is this is everything is working, that there's a center, either facilitation or topic, and people are taking turns, and here's everybody stepping all over each other, not hearing, and it not being a clear conversation.
Yeah, that's great. And that was so powerful and so simple. How about Dale? You wanna go next?
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
You're good.
Okay, good. So this is mine. So I've got here, I have a nice clear, similar to Nicole's, clear agendas. We're talking, we're having thoughts and all that. And my reality is I can't see anything. I have no control over my memo. I'm talking to myself on the phone. Nobody's participating. And I'm now all sweaty and stressed. So that's my reality.
Yes, we can all relate. Hey, how about Marisa?
Hi, yeah, my name is Marisa. I'm the public programs manager at the Santa Cruz Museum of Natural History. And so I did mine a little differently. I started with on one side this way. So this is just someone feeling engaged. Everyone's engaged. There's a plan. We're like focused. And then on this side, we're not really engaged. We're on our phone. There's some tech issues. Yeah.
Nice. About Kate?
Good morning, everybody. I am in a couple minutes late. I do not have a drawing, but I think for me, I've done a fair amount of Zooms with my team. I work at the Community Action Board at the Immigration Project. And I think an ideal Zoom session put on by a team is that kind of everybody knows their role in advance. I guess in a perfect world, we've practiced and that it's really clear, who's going to do what and what order we're going to do it in, and all the participants react the way we anticipated and are really, as everyone said, engaged, and we know that they're listening because they're asking questions. And the converse of that would be, I guess, that people don't know their roles. We did one of my coworkers and I last week, we tried out the interpreter feature for the first time, which was super cool. And I see Hannah just came on. Hannah taught me how to use it. But my takeaway from that is you really need 3 people, because we were trying to co-facilitate, but we were on 2 different audio channels, so we could no longer speak to each other. So she could see my lips moving, but and I'm trying to chat and let people in the waiting room and simultaneously interpret. It was a little much.
Yeah, that'll be great. I think as we go through this, to also hear more about those kinds of experiences, because some of those are really like logistical kind of troubleshooting issues that have to be thought of like way in advance. So that'll be great to hear more about what you've all learned from doing that. How about Angie? Are you able to unmute yourself and or turn on your camera? Do you want to?
Yes, hold a second. Maybe I could not turn on my camera.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, so my name is Angie Moreno. I work also for the Community Action Board. I work for the Rental Assistance Program. Oh, actually, hold on, I think I can. There we go.
Oh, great. Hi.
This is part of, so I didn't do a drawing, I just did writing.
all
So this
good.
is my ideal, that everybody could see each other, have an agenda, be organized, have people engage. I do a lot of my collaborative meetings through Zoom, and I pretty much what I do, I have every single agency give updates in order for them to keep them engaged. So that's kind of what I do to keep them engaged. And then reality is that technical difficulties like I experience right now, background noise, and people not being engaged.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Let's see. We have a few more people, and we're also more that we have quite a few questions that we wanted to be able to answer and address today. So I'm going to invite the remaining people, Diana, Melody. I think there's someone on the phone. I'm not sure if that's someone that's also on their regular computer as well. And Hannah, welcome Hannah. If anybody else drew a picture or wrote down words, I'm going to invite you all just to turn on your cameras and hold them up all at once, just so we can see. So coming together, a lot of the same kind of similar themes about, you know, collaborating, kind of working towards the same purpose, clarity, and then things go awry. Looks like there's a cat in Nicole Lezin's picture.
My imaginary cat that I wish I had.
Yeah. So a lot of kind of similar and overlapping themes there, and very similar also to some of the questions that we received through the registration form. So that was actually really helpful to get a sense of what kinds of things you're interested in, so that we can have a little bit of structure to today's session. We thought that, and for those of you who haven't had a chance to introduce yourselves verbally, go ahead and add your name and your organization to the chat box, just so that we all can see and know who's here. And then I'm going to start my screen share again to tell you a little bit about how we're planning to do these office hours today. And this is our very first attempt at doing these informal, pretty unstructured office hours. Today we're going to focus specifically on virtual facilitation. And this is all part of the Core Investments initiative. And so if you've been on one of these Core coffee chats before, you've heard us talk about Core as being both a funding model and a movement for equitable health and well-being using a collective impact approach. And normally we go into more detail about what Core is and the core conditions for health and well-being. Today we're going to not cover all that, because we do want to leave as much time as possible to get to your questions, be able to have all of you share some of your tips and lessons learned as well. So we're going to try to touch on the types of questions that came through in the registration form. Some of them had to do with just wanting some refreshers about basic Zoom meeting features. We're not going to go into a lot of depth about those today. If you saw the reminder email I sent out yesterday, we included links to previous coffee chats that we've done that go into more detail about how you find certain settings, change certain settings. We'll touch on some key things today, just that everyone is able to participate in some of the things that we're hoping to show or practice doing. Several of the questions have to do with just kind of logistical or best practice tips when you're facilitating meetings virtually versus in person, thinking about things like different size groups and handling issues like interpretation smoothly, and then a lot of questions around strategies to engage, and the level of formality or informality, using breakout rooms, thinking about distance learning, and just keeping people engaged. So again, we have some tips to share, but also really welcome and encourage all of you to share your ideas. And I'm going to have Nicole go over some of the Zoom basics so that we can talk about some of the ways that you can engage with us and each other during these office hours as well.
Thanks, Nicole. Before we do that, could I ask you, Nicole, to do your gallery screen again, and we can all put our pictures up, because despite our pre-planning, I forgot to take a screenshot of it, which was my task.
Everybody turn off your or turn on your cameras, hold up your pictures.
Okay. Let's see. Thank you. I'll try and hold up mine and still take a picture. Okay. So just an example of something that can go wrong. You plan and then you forget, or you don't look at the yellow sticky that you put on your computer. So really did not do that on purpose, but it does happen and it's okay. I think people are very forgiving about these kinds of glitches partly because we've all had them. And just like today, there's always something that can happen, and it's part of the reason why we like to do these together, and it's really great to have some backup, to have a buddy who can help you troubleshoot or handle things. So the chat, I think most of you have found your way to, but if you haven't, it's the little voice bubble, and it should open up a way to talk to everyone. That's the default. So you send a message to the whole group. You can send private messages by clicking on that. There's a little down arrow. So you can send a message to your co-facilitator, or for example, a couple people had joined a little after our start, and I was trying to let them know what we were doing by communicating with them privately instead of the whole group. So just a word of caution, you want to be careful about what you're emailing privately versus to the whole group. Another thing to point out here is that you can add a link in the chat, so somebody could go to download a PDF or another document or go to a website. You can also, if you see the 3 little dots next to the word file, that's a way to control some of the chat settings, but at the end of the session, you can save the chat file with everything that's in it. So you can capture people's comments and web links and all of that good stuff. We also wanted to let you know about some of the reaction options. So if you're a participant and you've opened up the participants list, as Nicole has here, you can see, because it's Nicole's screen, the co-hosts don't have the same options you do, but you should also have a little hand next to that yes green circle at the bottom. So that lets you raise your hand. You can agree with something, yes or no. You can ask the speakers to go slower or faster. You can have some more reactions like thumbs up or down, applause. The reactions button is also at the bottom of your screen with all of the other icons. And the participants list, there Nicole's clapping. The participants list, which some of you have already opened up, Nicole was hovering over the names to show that you can see who is muted or has their camera muted, but you can also use that more button to rename yourself or change some things about your description. And you, as the host, you can mute someone else. So that's sometimes handy. Nicole's changing her name to show where she's from, maybe, or a new screen name. And then that would show up here. A couple things to know as facilitators, usually the co-hosts are up top, and then everybody else should be in alphabetical order by whatever they put first in their name. So if they put their first name, it'll be by first name. If they put in an organization name, that's what will show up alphabetically. But that's sometimes handy if you're trying to ask people to do something like comment, let's hear from the A's, or let's divide into the first half of the alphabet, second half of the alphabet. And as a facilitator, you can track then not only how many people are on the call, but you can see all the names, which is sometimes hard to do with the video screens.
And I think we discovered in one of the coffee chats that sometimes the order of participants will change depending on whether they are muted. Like if I unmute Amy right now, actually let me do someone else. Okay, Diane, I'm going to try to unmute you. Nope, that didn't change. I think at one point we discovered that sometimes the order of participants change in this list depending on whether they're muted or unmuted. If they've raised their hand, they often
that
will,
could
I
be
think
it,
they
that it
bump up
bumps
to the
you
top
up.
of the list.
Yeah. So that the facilitator can see that somebody has their hand raised.
Mhm.
Somebody want to raise their hand? Test that for us. There you go. See?
Somebody said just raised her hand, and then her name bumped up to the top of the list there. Okay, so just, yeah, we found some, as we've learned some of those things, like, oh, that's a handy thing to know.
And
Yeah, go
I'll
ahead.
just say that I'm less familiar with some of the other virtual facilitation tools like GoToMeeting and Microsoft Teams, but we do use them because we use whatever our clients are using usually, or you may encounter that with your colleagues. So they're all a little different, but they all have some version of this. It's just a question of finding your way around. I feel like the Zoom tools on the Zoom website are excellent. So they have a lot of little short, crisp video instruction sorts of things that are really, really helpful. Any questions so far?
And then is there anyone who is listening in on their phone? But then also, okay. Dale, can we use you as an example of, because this can happen also in other meetings that you facilitate, that you might be facilitating. If someone has, so is this you, Dale, the 728 phone number?
Zero.
Yeah. And so there's a way that you can merge your base. It's like, this is the phone version of you and then the video version of you. And so it can help to merge them, especially if you're going to use breakout rooms, because otherwise they're treated like two different people. And then the phone ends up in one room and the video you ends up another. And that's how you end up with people that are like, I can't figure out how to talk to other people. So once you have joined a Zoom meeting, or once someone has joined a Zoom meeting, both by kind of computer, using their web camera and phone, then on the phone, you have to press pound and your participant ID number. And so each person has a different participant number. So for me, my participant number is 145277. Dale, do you see up in your Zoom window, do you see a little icon that's an eye with a circle around it?
Oh, I'm struggling. Sorry. Where would I see that at?
If you are looking, tell me what you see on your screen.
I just have the big gallery view, and then I have the participant list up.
Okay, so above the gallery view, do you see a couple of small icons? There's an eye with a circle around it. So click on that eye.
Eye with a circle around it.
It's on my screen, Dale, it's right next to the green check mark in a shield and the flashing recording button in the upper left.
Oh, a shield with a check mark on it.
And then
right next to the left
of it, do you see the eye with the circle? Okay, so click on that. That contains the meeting information.
Okay.
And then do you see towards the bottom, it has meeting ID, who's the host, the password for this meeting, the link, and then participant ID.
Participant ID, location, contact number, meeting ID. So basically my invite opened, correct?
I'm
probably not, I've really been struggling with Zoom. I may not be your best.
No, that's fine. That's fine, really. We've all been there, and we were all working with people who are going to have the same issue, so it's all fine. Don't worry.
And literally, I can't see anything now. I have two black screens in front of me.
Okay.
That is fine. So that, and I would say that that, I mean, like several of things that we've already talked about or tried to do this morning, like these are the kinds of things that happen all the time in virtual meetings. And so one of our tips, I think, is to, as you're planning agendas for virtual meetings, that like you're building in time for things like kind of explaining or making sure that everyone can find, if you're asking people to respond to a question in the chat box, that you've built in enough time to kind of walk people through, okay, how do they find the chat, whether it's on, you know, a computer or their phone or a, because it often looks different depending on what kind of device people are using. So a lot of those questions like, what do you tell, like we did just now, tell me what you're seeing on your screen. I found myself just having to train myself to ask that question a lot, just to remember that it looks different, or that not everyone, some people might be listening only and not actually seeing things that you're showing on your screen. And yeah, so I stopped my screen sharing. So sometimes we'll share our screen so that you can see, like if we're trying to direct you to or show you where to find something, we might share one of our screens, and then other times we'll turn it off so that you can more easily find things on your end. Okay. Nicole, should we move on to some of the questions that came in?
I think that's a good idea at this point. So,
and some of the initial questions again were just having to do with kind of like some of the suggestions for kind of meeting structure and logistics. And I know that we had some ideas about kind of how we've thought about it, or how we have approached it, and how it's different from live meetings. Nicole, do you want to start off with some of the insights that you had?
yeah, I was just replying to Hannah, actually, so about the concise video instructions for getting started on Zoom. So again, I would refer you to the Zoom website, and then if somebody has a little more time, we did a Zoom basics as one of our early core chats. But in terms of planning and structuring agendas, you know, the preparation is your spirit animal. Just that it's really like a live meeting. It's hard to over plan or over prepare, and there's a temptation, just because things are a little different and you're not doing the logistics of a physical meeting, of getting a space and arranging chairs and having handouts, to let up on some of that prep work, but it's just as important, if not more so. So we, although we're doing core coffee chats every week, Nicole and I often have a dress rehearsal beforehand, especially if we have other speakers. We always get on half an hour early to double check slide sharing and audio and all that. We have a really detailed agenda for the two of us about exactly where the handoffs are going to happen and who's going to do what. We really, even with a fair amount of experience with Zoom under our belts by now, we really don't take anything for granted. And I think figuring out, especially when you're working with other people, which is actually, to me, a preferred practice in Zoom, to have at a minimum somebody who's monitoring the chat for you so that the presenter isn't distracted, as I just was, trying to answer questions and deal with that. And also to admit people from a waiting room, for example. There are just a lot of little things that are important for the smooth operation of the meeting, as well as the content. You want to have an opportunity to respond to both questions and collect them, because the chat, as you may have noticed, scrolls. The more people that answer something, it kind of moves along. So when I've got chat duty, I actually extract things from the chat and put them into a blank Word document so I can track them. If we have a large meeting with several presenters, we're trying to group the questions and responses so that the presenter can answer several questions at once. So it's really helpful to have another way to handle the chat stuff in real time. But I think that the things like if you're using polls or breakout sessions, having somebody as skilled as Nicole Y at doing that is really great. But again, the prep work, thinking through how many people you want in the groups, what you're going to actually do in those intervals, how long they should last in the scope of your meeting, all of those things really deserve attention well before you go live.
A couple things I think I would add to that are, as part of that planning, I know one of the kind of skills or habits I've had to really practice and make sure I'm remembering to do is, even as I'm planning out an agenda and trying to incorporate different ways to engage people and involve people in the meeting, that then I have to do kind of this next layer of checking, okay, would that work for people that can't actually see what's on screen? Can that work for people that are having a hard time hearing? Or would that work for people that might have really limited or hard time using text? So it's almost like then, and sometimes as we've gone through the agenda, we'll say, that would actually take more time to explain or make sure everyone knows how to do that, or we might lose people if we do that. So let's actually skip that activity, even though it would be really fun and cool to do it. And I would say we do that kind of thinking and screening even when we're planning face-to-face meetings, but it almost feels like there has to be more attention to that when thinking about some of these virtual meetings, because otherwise things can get really confusing, or you end up spending like half your meeting trying to backtrack and explain and get everyone on the same page when maybe it didn't really serve the purpose of the meeting. We'll pause for a second and see, are there any questions in response to some of the initial tips that we just shared, or things that you'd like to add to that in terms of what you've found as kind of logistics-wise, planning-wise, some things that are helpful?
Yeah, I would say that the several of the tips we've just mentioned, we learned from all of you. So thank you for those.
Anna, you look like you're about to
ask or kind of share that I've in hosting a number of large Zoom events. Sorry, are you guys able to hear me? There's someone else talking in the room.
It's fine. We understand. Thank you.
Okay. In hosting a lot of larger Zoom events recently, I have just found that no matter how many times I try to do a trial run with like interpreters, speakers, people who are doing tech support, I can never seem to recreate the situation exactly, such that even when I do trial runs, there's still like a dozen other sort of issues that come up that I couldn't have troubleshooted beforehand because the circumstances weren't quite right. Like I'm doing a test with 2 other people when the actual thing has hundreds of folks and dozens of speakers. So I just am throwing that out there as something I've found really challenging, and then also curious if anyone has had any best practices or something to try to combat that.
Maybe before we chime in on that, does anybody want to answer that or share similar experiences and how you've handled that? I think I can totally relate to that, Hannah. I feel like every time, and this happened even just now while Nicole and I got on early to do our little practice run, where I was getting the slides set up, and I have dual monitors. And so normally I have it set up and I know the exact steps I need to go through to show the slide, slideshow on one screen, but still have my other screen available so I can be looking up or finding other things. And so when I shared my screen just now when it was just Nicole and I on the call, all of a sudden both monitors were showing the slideshow and I couldn't get to anything else. I'm like, it's 5 minutes before, people are going to start joining. So like things like that happen frequently. And I'll have to say that like in the beginning when we were getting used to Zoom, I mean, I'd used Zoom before, but not to the extent that, you know, we are now. Like, it would really kind of frowse me and almost like, you know, be like the deer in the headlights, like, what do I do now? And then that's where having, you know, Nicole as, you know, a support, having, you know, even times we've had where I've co-facilitated with 2 or 3 other people, like, even if it's something that we couldn't have planned for or anticipated, just having at least one other person who feels really comfortable and fluent in Zoom that can do that rapid troubleshooting while the other person is kind of frozen is really helpful, because you're right, there can be so many things that happen that there's no way you could have planned for. Sometimes you learn things in the moment the hard way, like around, you know, what you were and Kate were mentioning around interpretation, or and then it becomes okay, so next time here's what we'll know to do differently. Or in your trial runs, just really kind of pushing your partners and your team to really think about, okay, what are the unexpected things that might happen, and is there a way to just have a sense of how we would handle that in the moment if it came up?
I also think it's okay to say we're trying something for the first time and we're going to learn about this together. We've done that with some of the tools that we were not super experienced with, but we wanted to try, and we wanted to try with a group, and we kind of assumed that other people might be interested in trying them too. And so I would forgive yourself and ask for forgiveness from your group as well. You know, this is not a time where we need to be tougher on ourselves about anything.
Is that helpful, Hannah? Did that either kind of
Thank you.
affirm the way
And
that you
I think, no, that was helpful. And it just helps to sort of bring it up with other people who understand being in these similar roles. I think what I would say is, from my end, I think I'm going to try to more normalize that is just something that is expected of a speaker, because a lot of times it feels like I'm asking extra too much, you know, to have them sort of book themselves twice, essentially, for some very, very busy people. So I think maybe myself and others on this call we can just start trying to normalize that kind of prep work being necessary.
Yeah.
I think that is totally fair. And you know, if any of us were being in that position of speaking to others on behalf of, as a guest of an organization, we would want to bring our best selves too. So my forgiveness comment was not about being sloppy or unprepared, about glitches happening.
Yeah, understood. Thank you, Nicole.
Some of the things too that we've found, because sometimes we'll lead really informal meetings on Zoom, where they are just really meant to be check-ins or just cover some really uncomplicated issues or topics, and so the level of informality and level of structure can be much looser, and then other times there might be you know, a need for more structure and more structured agendas. And so much like in-person meetings, you kind of scale the amount of prep and planning and structure according to like kind of how complex or how large your meeting is. And so I would say those kinds of things are still hold true, whether it's virtual or in person. One of the things we've found is that sometimes some of the facilitation tools and techniques we like to use in face-to-face meetings are the things that have taken extra time and thought to figure out, okay, how would that work virtually? There are a lot of really cool tools out there, like web-based tools, you know, for whiteboards and sticky notes and mind mapping, and we've tried out some of those ourselves, both just to get familiar with them, to know what the options are. We've tried using them in some meetings, and I think same kind of theme that we were mentioning earlier, that sometimes something can look really cool online. Like there are websites called Mural, and is it Miro or
Miro? Yeah.
MIRO and MURAL, both that are online, really sophisticated whiteboards where you can do lots of different cool things. So those might be really helpful if there's, you know, a few people on your team that are committed to like really learning how to use them, because not only do you have to learn how to use them, but then you have to be able to teach others how to use it well, so that if you're using it for like a brainstorming session in a meeting, kind of like you would do with sticky notes and flip charts in a face-to-face meeting, it's another one of those areas where you just have to kind of build in enough time to teach people how to use it so that it's an effective exercise. And so some of the meetings I know that where I've tried to incorporate some of those techniques, I've actually gone with something that is a simpler tool. So Nicole Lezin posted in the chat box some of the ones that we're mentioning. Idea boards is one of the ones that we covered in one of the earlier coffee chats on how to facilitate virtual meetings. If you want, I can show you really quickly what it actually looks like.
And while Nicole's pulling that up, I'll just say I played with Miro for a while for another group and call, and the person I was working with used it extensively. And her comment was it was worth the investment to learn how to use Miro if you were with a group that you're working with over time, so that you can all become more familiar as a group and start using it. But this is much more straightforward and simple, what Nicole's showing you right here.
So this is like a blank version. I won't go through the steps of how you create this at this point, but it's basically just, you know, people can add sticky notes. You know, and my keyboard's actually freezing up, so it won't, that might not be as effective. It's a really simple kind of whiteboard where people can add sticky notes for like a brainstorming exercise, but it has some limitations in terms of, you know, how much you can organize it or group things, whereas some of the tools like Miro or Mural have a lot more bells and whistles to them. But as Nicole is saying, you know, because of the kind of time it would take to learn how to use them, those are probably things you would want to just use for kind of longer term ongoing groups of people or projects or meetings. Google Docs, Sheets, Slides tend to work well for kind of that collaborative brainstorming or co-editing or co-creating in a meeting. And often, you know, the best way to do something like that is to, you know, you create that in advance and then share a link in the chat box if you want people to then be accessing it and doing something with it during a meeting.
And letting them know ahead of time that you'll be doing that so that they can maybe make a choice to be at a screen, at a laptop instead of a phone, if that makes it easier for them to participate, if they have an option.
I'm curious, has anyone else discovered or tried different tools or kind of resources to do brainstorming or group discussions or things to keep people engaged in virtual meetings? And this could be
is a
things.
little different. I would just offer this as my experience. When I've been learning these things, and a lot of them I learned from you all when you started these, is I practice them when I'm doing things that don't matter as much, like my family Zooms and friends. Like I'm on a game night every Friday, and so I've created the surveys and then the breakout rooms, and then I have taught people, and I just felt more confident than when I got to do it for, you know, my work.
That's a great suggestion, Peggy. We were discussing earlier before we officially started, we're interested in trying to use games in work settings. So maybe we can talk further about if you found something that's particularly helpful.
And I guess I'm curious what kinds of, so we got some questions about, you know, what are some effective strategies for engaging people in meetings? And I guess I'm actually curious to hear a little bit more. So whether you want to unmute yourself and ask and say it, or you can type it in the chat box, like what are some of the things you have tried in terms of engaging people in meetings? And then what do you find most difficult? So we can kind of do some group group think around how to solve for some of the more difficult things.
And then just as you're thinking about that and responding, I just wanted to point out when Peggy raised her thumb earlier, that is an A-OK way to react. You don't have to go to the reaction button, click on it, find the thumbs up. Sometimes the old school waving is all good. So just a reminder that there's lots of great tech out there and we want to make the best use of it, but it doesn't have to be the only way to do things.
Yeah, and in fact, the initial exercise that we had people do if they joined early, or just drawing a picture, that was so just to give an example of how not everything has to be high tech, right? That you can still use some of the analog or low tech things that can actually spark creativity, even if people don't feel like they're artists or they are hesitant to share their drawings. Just like tapping into a different part of the brain can also be a great way to get different people engaged. Dale is saying the silence is hard. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and I would add, that's a good one, Dale, to say, I feel like it's just so obvious, but I'll say it. When we're sitting around the table, we can see each other, we can see body language, we can gauge that someone's disengaged, unhappy, not following. And I feel like because perhaps this is still so new for us, we all stare at the camera, we still straight ahead, and we're trying to listen and participate. But I feel like that's one of the biggest things that I need help with is how do I even ascertain or identify what I think is like Dale's looking very serious right now, but maybe she thinks what I'm saying is crazy, and it's like if we were together, we would laugh and I would say, is that okay? So
Yeah.
I don't know, without wasting a lot of time, how to measure and be aware of and what to do about engagement.
Yeah. What are would anybody else like to unmute themselves to share their thoughts about how do you read body language? How do you respond in this virtual format?
I guess in response to that in particular, I think it's difficult. And just like kind of in general, I think the only thing that's really worked for me for larger groups is breakout sessions. Like I feel like people are more inclined to engage if they're in a smaller group. Like there's more, they kind of have to, because you feel guilty letting like one person take on all of that burden. Whereas once you get over like 4 people, even, I feel like people are inclined to kind of just sit back. So maybe limiting the group size. But then with that, it's difficult for facilitation. So I'm having difficulties with that. And for me, I'm mainly facilitating meetings with people I don't know, who are engaging in like a program. And we're trying to make our programs more engaging so that they're not just lectures, where people sit back and they're not actually participating in it. But I'm finding like, why even bother if people aren't participating? It would be easier to just have it be a webinar. And I can't really gauge personally as a facilitator how well the breakout rooms are going because I'm not in them. I can see how my breakout room is going, which is better than me with the 20 people in the room. So I'm having difficulty with that. And then, I'll do like a share out afterwards and people aren't speaking up. So I don't know if it's that my questions aren't great or what.
Couple thoughts. One is that I think the chat is underestimated and sometimes underused as a way to get engagement. For example, Amy commented on Peggy's comment, sort of affirmation and asking people to, at regular intervals, to react to something in the chat is a form of engagement. That it's reassuring to the facilitators because you can see that multiple people are responding. But also people can respond to each other. So there's that kind of peer situation going on, an exchange of information. In terms of the breakouts and what's going on in them, I don't know, Marisa, if you have a chance to sort of plant somebody in some of the groups. You said most of the people you're in a Zoom with are not people you know or work with. But we all, in our recent chat, we were able to record the breakouts, to ask people in the breakouts who were kind of co-facilitators with us. There's a setting where you can allow people to record the breakouts, and that's another way to kind of see what's going on in them. But it's always good to revisit the questions and think about maybe having fewer questions or what kinds of things might spark more discussion and reaction, and maybe reaching out to the people who you felt were a little disengaged in your last call and asking them what that was about. You know, just getting some feedback. Those just a couple of suggestions for, and it is hard, and it's so you're at the mercy of how those groups end up and what happens in them, and that's hard to lose control over them. It can be really good too, but it's hard when you can't be there. You can't walk around the way you might in a room and kind of hear multiple groups at once. Valeria has a question about recording the breakout room conversations. So, Nicole, do you want to show where that is on the?
So there would be two things you would have to do. You'd have to go into your settings in your web portal, so basically your Zoom account online, and there's a setting that you would have to choose so that you can allow participants to record. And then when you are in a meeting, I'm going to share my screen again for a second so I can show you where that is. Then when you're in a meeting, if you have that setting turned on in your Zoom account online, then if you hover over any person's name and click more, then this little menu pops up, and then you can allow them to record. So you have to do both things, because that was another thing that we learned kind of through just trial and error.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you send someone, we did a practice run at one point with multiple co-facilitators, send everybody to breakout rooms, but only people I had designated as co-hosts could record. Everyone else was trying to request permission to record for me, but I wasn't seeing any. I don't see like any messages pop up saying someone's requesting. So you just have to remember to, if you have designated facilitators or people that are going to record, that you give them that permission to record. So it's another thing to, again, when you think about your planning, that's, you know, something to think about. Okay, do we want people to do breakouts? Do we want to be able to document or record? Do we have enough either designated facilitators or people that would at least agree to be the person that records, so that you can have that, all the settings in place?
And Nicole, am I remembering correctly that I think I was the one who, for some reason, did not turn off the recording, and it overrode your recording of the rest of the meeting?
Yes, and I think that happened because you are also the co-host.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
So I think only one of the hosts can record
at any given time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We've also, as I mentioned earlier, we gave people an option to not participate in the breakouts by putting an asterisk next to their name in the participants list. And those people stayed in the main session with Nicole. And so it was kind of a ungrouped group while the breakout sessions were happening. And we found that reduces the attrition. Sometimes if people don't want to participate in a breakout group, they'll leave the meeting altogether, which is not what we want.
And I see, Hannah, your question or comment, and you had submitted that in the registration form too, about how the live interpretation doesn't work once you send people to breakout rooms. And so that's another way, if you know who your participants are and what language they're speaking and whether it's someone that needs interpretation. Those are all things to kind of think about, like, do you have the ability to gather that information as part of your, like, are you going to use a registration process so you can collect that kind of information, because it can help you then think about, oh, okay, then do we need to structure breakout rooms so that certain people are together, or anybody that needs that interpretation then stays in the main room so that the interpreter can still interpret if needed. Like if the facilitation is going to be done in Spanish, for instance, but there are going to be people that need English interpretation. So, because there are some workarounds like that, but that all becomes dependent on how much information you have ahead of time. Would you be able to structure your breakout rooms in that way? One of the things that we have found with breakout rooms is they're really effective. People really enjoy the opportunity to interact with each other in those smaller groups. It's easiest to do breakout rooms, especially in short meetings, if you just automatically assign people to the breakout rooms. Like you're not aiming for certain people to be with certain people or things like that. But if you want to have breakout rooms where you have designated facilitators, they're all spread out across your breakout rooms. If you need to plan things according to language that people speak, not only does it require gathering some information up front, again, and we do that through a registration process, so that's that would be, I think, our recommendation. But then making sure you're building enough time in the meeting to be able to set up the breakout rooms that way. So for instance, the last coffee chat we did on health and all policies, we were planning for 9 breakout rooms. We had 9 facilitators. So we also had to make sure that as someone was speaking, whoever the speaker was, that was my time I was creating the breakout rooms. And because people often do drop off and leave the meeting when they hear the word breakout room, they're like, oh no, small groups, I'm leaving. So it meant the roster of participants kept changing, like every second. And so I was kind of going through, like right up to the last second before I opened up the breakout rooms, like adjusting the number of participants, but wanting to keep the facilitators the same. So as long as you have someone like that who's not also trying to present and be the speaker at the same time, it can be really doable and it came off, I think, in a really seamless way. Mm-hmm. Behind the scenes, it can feel like a total scramble while, we're doing it, like, talk a little slower so I can get this set up.
Well, we know there are more questions and we wish we had more time to get to them, but this was an experiment for us, but we would like to do these office hours again in the future. And so we have an in-meeting poll survey for you to let us know what you thought. So we'd appreciate your responses in the moment. Because just as people leave group meetings when the breakouts start, they also don't answer feedback surveys very well. So we're gonna take advantage of you being here with us.
So just so you know, this poll has, I think, 7 questions to it. So we'll be able to see who's responding after you've finished all 7 questions.
And if there's anything that's not covered by the poll that you'd like us to know, please feel free to either enter things in the chat or let us know by email. We really do take all your feedback seriously and use it. So please don't be shy.
Maybe as you're filling out the poll, we'll see if we can just quickly touch on some of the other questions in the chat. So Hannah, yes, you should be able to use the Zoom whiteboard tool in the breakout sessions. That still works as well, and participants can save what's on the whiteboard as well. You won't necessarily be able to then bring it back into and show it in the main meeting room, but your breakouts should still be able to use the whiteboards. And I think Nicole responded to Dale's earlier question about how do you practice Zoom alone? And so one of the things we found helpful is creating a separate Zoom account using an alternate email if you can, so that you can be logged in as, I have like my work Zoom account, and then I have a Zoom account under my personal non-work email account. And I actually even have a third Zoom account for a different project. And so sometimes I will actually log in on all three to see, okay, what do participants see? And I'll even record my test meetings so then I can look back at it later to see what happens when I'm trying certain things. And yeah, it's hard, both the silence and leading a team that doesn't have cameras is hard. And sometimes what I've told other people is you kind of have to think of it as like you're the host of a party and your role is to kind of make people feel welcome and comfortable, and no matter who they are or what they're doing or how verbal or active they are. And so sometimes that means, like I find myself sometimes being like overly animated, especially, because it can feel so weird to be on camera. I don't like seeing myself on camera actually at all. But that's an area I've had to kind of learn to get more comfortable with. And so just making the small talk, having, different ways for people to be engaged, sometimes can help break the silence, or at least not have it turn into that super awkward, like, oh no.
Are they really there? So, and I would just comment that, we actually do know how to have Zoom calls without cameras. They're called conference calls. And we used to do that routinely all the time and not feel like we had to entertain people or make it the best part of their day. And it just, there's a function to all of these tools. And if it's not working for somebody, I've had a couple situations recently where I've just done regular phone calls, and it's kind of refreshing. But you pay attention in a different way. And, I think the emphasis on Zoom, because of being separated and remote, it's offered some connection and visual stimulation that's fantastic. But it doesn't need to replace every single communication we've ever had, individually or as groups. And I think we should all be thinking about some things where a call might work just as well, and maybe even better. So sorry, Zoom, love you, but not every time.
Hannah's mentioning too, another challenge being just knowing every word that you're saying is recorded. If it's being recorded, that then it lives for eternity, and if you say the wrong thing or just stumble over your words, or again, all of that has happened to us too. And
I don't like seeing myself on camera, and I even more dislike hearing my voice recorded. It's just so, yeah, you just have to let that stuff go and get over it, I guess. But it is extra pressure. You're right. Try not to think about it is the way to go.
Yeah.
But now you made me think about it, so I'm really self-conscious.
And just say that everyone's in the same boat, right? That's
true.
Is the only sort of reassuring piece I feel about this. We normalize it. Everyone's learning. This is a new reality that's going to persist. And I think that it's a very universal sort of bonding experience for all of us. And we sort of have to normalize it and be honest about it. And I think that part of just trying to kind of, as much as you can, have sort of smaller meetings where you really, get to connect without having to do too much business or having to do too much multitasking is really helpful. And I think that for me has helped to kind of overcome some of those same fears and concerns that just weren't as live even when we were in a whole room, recording a meeting for the purposes of minutes.
Right.
There is something, as you say, kind of strange and more permanent about this entire interaction. But at the same time, on the end of the camera is another person, or even if their camera is not switched on, right?
Right.
I found the surveys to be really helpful, too, in terms of if you can give one out sort of towards the end, like, link to evaluation, or just even open up and have there be a comment section if the evaluation or the survey is very specific to the meeting you've done or the presentation that's been given, but to leave space for comments. And if that can be anonymous, then people sometimes have been just generous and helpful with their comments about how to make it better or tips that they've learned. Just kind of opening the way, because, you know, that acknowledgement of we are all learning together, and very few of us were, you know, expert, much less skilled, or the other way around, coming into this, you know, right? We've been participants far more than we'd ever been facilitators, I think, for the most of us, you know, prior to this amount of remote work. And yeah, so just thank you for opening up this space to let us, you know, kind of talk and learn together. It's really useful.
You're very welcome. It's great for us too. Yeah.
Any final burning questions or comments or tips that any of you want to add before we close?
Might be way too much to just comment right at the end here, so I apologize in advance. But I noticed on your beginning slide, you had a comment or a little note about distance learning. And I just wanted to comment that in the circles and spaces that I'm in with Community Action Board, it's just something that's coming up a lot. And ironically, we're trying to think of, like, is there a way to both increase tech access by getting people onto a Zoom call or something that explains more about distance learning? I'm just throwing that out there because I know you all are kind of leading a lot of efforts with these core chats to increase community capacity. And I'm just wondering, yeah, how we can do that more as a community. It's a little
great
chicken egg situation of, like,
yeah,
get someone on a video conference call to teach them about video conference calls, but
exactly. No, that's definitely on our radar. Thank you, Hannah.
yeah.
And it's not like the old days where you can get people in a room together to share a resource. So that makes it extra challenging, but yeah, we'll get in touch and maybe we can work on that together.
Yeah, thank you. Just thought I'd throw that out there. Thanks for being today, though. This was very helpful.
I'm glad. Thank you all for hanging in there and hanging a few minutes past our official time, which as facilitators, we normally wouldn't like to do, but in these sessions also try to plan for. We didn't mention that earlier. So in addition to getting on early, being able to hang out a little bit later in case people have extra questions, and asking your presenters to do that as well is another thing that we've been trying to make routine, so that there aren't too many unanswered questions, and then offering a way to respond to those questions in a written form. A Q&A document to send out afterwards is another thing we've tried to adopt as a best practice, just to not leave too many things hanging. But I think that's it for now.
That's it for today.
Okay, thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.
And we'll see you next time. We'll send out an August schedule. I know we're in August, but we're working on it. We'll keep you posted.